Steve Harvey had hosted Family Feud for over 12 years, and during that time he had developed an extraordinary ability to read people and understand family dynamics within minutes of meeting them. He could sense tension between siblings, detect when parents were putting pressure on their children, and notice the subtle ways that couples communicated their affection or lack thereof. But on that Thursday afternoon in November 2024, Steve would encounter a situation that would test not just his ability to read people, but his willingness to address what he saw directly and without apology. The Martinez family from Arizona stood ready to compete, appearing cheerful and enthusiastic under the studio lights. What was about to unfold would become one of the most powerful moments in the show's history, a moment when Steve Harvey would use his platform to defend a woman's dignity and challenge a man to examine his treatment of his wife. Before we continue with this important story about respect, love, and the courage to speak truth, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us share these meaningful stories with people who need to hear them. The Martinez family appeared to be a typical American family as they took their positions at the podium. Daniel Martinez, age 52, was a former college football player whose athletic build had softened somewhat with age, but whose commanding presence remained intact. Beside him stood his wife Catherine, age 50, a high school English teacher whose warm smile and gentle demeanor suggested years of patient work with teenagers. Their 3 adult children completed the team: their son Robert at 28, their daughter Amanda at 25, and their youngest son Christopher at 22. The family had traveled from Phoenix specifically for this taping, and according to their pre-show interviews, they were excited about the opportunity to compete and spend time together as a family. Steve Harvey had greeted the Martinez family during the pre-show warm-up as he did with all contestants, shaking hands and making jokes to help everyone relax before taping began. During this interaction, he had noticed something subtle but telling. When Steve had approached Catherine to shake her hand and welcome her to the show, Daniel had physically stepped between them in a way that seemed protective, bordering on possessive. Catherine had laughed it off, making a joke about her husband being territorial, but Steve had noticed the brief flash of embarrassment in her eyes. It was a small moment, easily dismissed, but Steve filed it away in his mind as something to watch. The game began with the typical energy and excitement that characterized Family Feud. Both families were playing well, the survey answers were generating laughs, and Steve was in his element delivering his signature humor and commentary. But as the game progressed, Steve began to notice a pattern in how Daniel Martinez interacted with his wife. When Catherine gave a correct answer, Daniel would offer a brief nod but no enthusiastic celebration. When she gave an incorrect answer, his disappointment was visible and pronounced, with audible sighs and subtle head shakes. Most tellingly, whenever Catherine approached the buzzer or podium, Daniel would never offer physical support or encouragement through touch, while he readily high-fived and hugged his children when they performed well. The pattern became more obvious during the second round when both Catherine and Daniel were called to the face-off position at the center podium. This moment in Family Feud typically involved friendly competition between family members, often with playful physical contact like shoulder bumps or encouraging pats on the back. But when Catherine moved to stand beside her husband at the buzzer, Daniel visibly shifted his body away from her, maintaining a clear physical distance. Catherine had reached out to touch his arm in a gesture of good luck or solidarity, and Daniel had actually pulled his arm away, not dramatically but definitely, leaving Catherine's hand hanging in the air for an awkward moment before she withdrew it and clasped her hands together in front of her. Steve Harvey had witnessed this interaction, and his expression had shifted from his usual playful demeanor to something more serious and observant. He asked the face-off question, and Daniel had buzzed in first with the correct answer, winning the round for his family. As was customary, Steve congratulated the winner, but instead of immediately moving on with the game, he paused and looked directly at Daniel with an expression that the audience would later describe as a mixture of curiosity and disapproval. The moment passed quickly and the game continued, but several audience members had noticed Steve's reaction and sensed that something significant had just occurred. The Martinez family was playing well overall and eventually won the main game, advancing to the fast money round. Catherine and her eldest son Robert would be playing for the $20,000 prize. Robert went first and performed admirably, scoring 164 points. This meant Catherine needed just 36 points to secure the victory for her family. As Catherine prepared to take her position at the Fast Money podium, Steve noticed that Daniel made no move to offer her any encouragement or support. He stood with his arms crossed, his expression neutral, while their 3 children gathered around their mother to wish her luck and give her encouraging hugs. Catherine took her position at the podium, and Steve began the Fast Money questioning. She answered all 5 questions with thoughtful, reasonable responses. When the answers were revealed, she had scored 142 points on her own, bringing the family's total to 306 points. They had won the $20,000 decisively. The studio audience erupted in applause and celebration. Catherine's children immediately rushed to embrace their mother, jumping and celebrating her success. But Daniel remained standing several feet away, offering only a brief clap and a small smile that did not reach his eyes. He made no move to congratulate his wife or share in the family's celebration of her achievement. What happened next would become one of the most talked-about moments in Family Feud history. Steve Harvey, instead of immediately moving into his usual congratulatory remarks and wrap-up, stood looking at Daniel Martinez with an expression of clear disapproval. The audience began to quiet, sensing that Steve had something to say. When Steve finally spoke, his tone was serious and direct in a way that was rarely heard on the typically lighthearted game show. Steve addressed Daniel directly, asking him why he had not congratulated his wife or joined his family in celebrating her success. The question was delivered calmly but firmly, with an edge that suggested Steve already knew the answer and was not asking out of genuine curiosity, but rather to make a point. Daniel appeared taken aback by the question, clearly not expecting to be called out on national television. He stammered something about being happy for the family's win and not being a particularly demonstrative person. Steve listened to this explanation with a skeptical expression that made it clear he was not buying what Daniel was selling. Steve then did something extraordinary. He told Daniel that he had been watching the family throughout the game, and he had noticed a pattern of behavior that troubled him deeply. He pointed out that Daniel had been physically affectionate with his children throughout the taping, offering high fives, shoulder pats, and celebratory hugs. But with Catherine, his wife of over 30 years, Daniel had maintained consistent physical distance and had even actively pulled away when she had tried to touch him. Steve asked Daniel directly if he was aware of this behavior and if he could explain why he treated his wife so differently from how he treated his children. The studio was completely silent except for Steve's voice. The audience members sat frozen, shocked to witness such a direct confrontation on what was typically a feel-good family game show. Catherine stood at the Fast Money podium looking mortified and embarrassed, clearly wishing she could disappear. The Martinez children looked confused and uncomfortable, caught between their parents in a moment of unexpected tension. But Steve Harvey was not backing down. He had apparently decided that this moment required something more than polite silence or looking the other way. Daniel attempted to deflect, saying that everyone showed affection differently and that his relationship with his wife was private and not appropriate for public discussion. Steve acknowledged that while relationships were indeed private, the behavior he had witnessed was public and had occurred on this stage in front of cameras and an audience. He pointed out that Daniel had made a choice to physically reject his wife's attempts at affection multiple times during the taping, and that those choices sent a message about how he valued and respected his wife. Steve asked Daniel if he understood what message his behavior was communicating to his wife, to his children, and to everyone watching. The confrontation could have become hostile or defensive, but Steve's tone remained firm yet caring throughout. He was not attacking Daniel personally or attempting to humiliate him. Rather, he was holding up a mirror and asking Daniel to examine his own behavior and its impact. Steve spoke about the importance of showing respect and affection to your spouse, especially in public settings. He talked about how small gestures like holding hands, offering congratulations, or sharing in celebrations were not just niceties, but essential ways of communicating value and partnership in a marriage. Steve then turned to address Catherine directly. He apologized for putting her in an uncomfortable position by raising this issue publicly, but he said he felt compelled to speak because he had watched her face throughout the game. He had seen how each small rejection had landed, how she had tried to hide her hurt behind smiles, how she had made herself smaller and less demanding in response to her husband's coldness. Steve told Catherine that she deserved better, that any woman who had been married for 3 decades and who had raised 3 successful children deserved to have her hand held and her achievements celebrated by her husband. Catherine's response to Steve's words was powerful and emotional. She began to cry, not from embarrassment, but from what appeared to be relief at having someone acknowledge what she had been experiencing. She thanked Steve for noticing and for caring enough to say something. Then Catherine did something brave. She began to speak honestly about her marriage in front of the cameras, the studio audience, and most importantly, her husband and children. Catherine explained that Daniel's physical coldness toward her was not new and was not limited to their time on the Family Feud stage. She said that for the past 15 years, Daniel had become increasingly distant and withdrawn from their marriage. He was a good father to their children, involved and affectionate with them. He was a good provider, working hard to support the family financially. But as a husband, he had become remote and inaccessible. He rarely touched her anymore, avoided any public displays of affection, and seemed uncomfortable with even basic gestures of marital intimacy like holding hands or sitting close together. Catherine continued, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. She described how she had tried everything over the years to bridge the distance between them. She had asked him directly what was wrong and if she had done something to push him away. She had suggested marriage counseling, which he had refused. She had tried being more affectionate herself, hoping he would reciprocate, but he had responded to her overtures with awkwardness and withdrawal. She had tried giving him space, thinking perhaps he needed room to work through whatever was bothering him. Nothing had changed his behavior. Slowly over the years, she had resigned herself to a marriage that looked successful from the outside, but felt hollow and lonely on the inside. What made Catherine's confession particularly poignant was her description of the impact this emotional distance had on her sense of self-worth. She explained that when your spouse consistently refuses physical affection and emotional intimacy, it becomes impossible not to internalize that rejection as a statement about your value. She had found herself questioning whether she was still attractive, whether she had somehow failed as a wife, whether she deserved the coldness she was receiving. She had watched Daniel be warm and engaged with their children, with friends, with colleagues, and she could not understand why she alone was kept at arm's length. The pain of that confusion and rejection had eroded her confidence and left her feeling unwanted in her own marriage. The Martinez children were visibly shocked by their mother's words. It became clear that while they may have noticed their parents' lack of physical affection, they had not understood the depth of pain their mother had been carrying or the extent to which their father's behavior had affected her. Amanda, the daughter, moved to stand beside her mother and put her arm around her shoulders in a gesture of support and solidarity. Two sons looked at their father with expressions that mixed confusion, disappointment, and a dawning awareness that their family dynamic was more troubled than they had realized. Steve Harvey listened to Catherine's confession with visible emotion. When she finished speaking, he thanked her for her honesty and her courage in sharing her truth. Then he turned back to Daniel and asked him a simple but profound question. He asked Daniel if he still loved his wife. The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. If Daniel said no, he would be admitting that his marriage was essentially over and that he had been living a lie. If he said yes, he would have to explain why his behavior did not reflect that love. Daniel's response was complicated and revealing. He said that yes, he loved Catherine, but he struggled with expressing that love physically and emotionally. He explained that he had grown up in a household where physical affection was rare and emotions were rarely discussed. His own father had been a stern, distant figure who believed that providing for the family was the primary way to show love. Daniel acknowledged that he had internalized those patterns and had difficulty breaking free from them even though intellectually he understood they were harmful. He said that as he had gotten older, his discomfort with physical affection had intensified rather than decreased, though he could not fully explain why. Steve listened to this explanation and then offered a perspective that would resonate with millions of viewers when the episode aired. He acknowledged that childhood experiences and family patterns were powerful influences on behavior. But he also firmly stated that those patterns were explanations, not excuses. Daniel was a grown man in his 50s who had been married for over 30 years. At some point, the responsibility for changing harmful patterns fell squarely on his shoulders, regardless of where those patterns originated. Steve pointed out that Daniel had managed to overcome whatever discomfort he felt about physical affection when it came to his children. He hugged them, high-fived them, showed them physical affection regularly. So clearly the capability was there. The question was why Daniel could not or would not extend that same affection to his wife. Steve then spoke about what marriage required to be healthy and sustainable. He talked about the need for consistent demonstration of love, respect, and appreciation. He explained that love was not just a feeling, but a series of actions and choices made every single day. Holding your wife's hand was a choice. Congratulating her on her achievements was a choice. Showing her physical affection was a choice. And when you consistently chose not to do these things, you were choosing to communicate that your wife was less important, less valued, less deserving of affection than other people in your life. Steve asked Daniel if that was truly the message he wanted to send to the woman who had stood by him for 3 decades, raised his children, and built a life with him. The confrontation reached its emotional peak when Steve challenged Daniel to make a different choice right now in this moment. He told Daniel to walk over to his wife, take her hand, look her in the eyes, and tell her that he was proud of her for winning the fast money round and for having the courage to speak her truth. Steve made it clear that this was not a request or a suggestion. It was a challenge, issued publicly and directly, to demonstrate whether Daniel was willing to change his behavior or whether his discomfort was more important to him than his wife's emotional well-being. The audience watched in complete silence as Daniel stood frozen for several long seconds. The internal struggle was visible on his face. Catherine stood at the podium, tears streaming down her face, waiting to see if her husband would take even this small step toward bridging the distance between them. The Martinez children watched their father, perhaps seeing him with new eyes and waiting to see what choice he would make in this crucial moment. Finally, slowly, Daniel began to walk toward his wife. His movements were stiff and awkward, showing how genuinely uncomfortable he was with what he was about to do. But he kept walking until he stood directly in front of Catherine. He reached out and took both of her hands in his, the gesture clearly requiring significant effort and courage on his part. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion and embarrassment, but the words were sincere. Daniel told Catherine that he was proud of her for her performance in the fast money round. He told her that he was sorry for making her feel unvalued and unwanted. He admitted that he had been selfish and thoughtless in refusing to show her the affection and appreciation she deserved. He acknowledged that his behavior had hurt her deeply and that no explanation or excuse justified that hurt. He said that he loved her and that he wanted to do better to be better, but that he needed help to change patterns that had become deeply ingrained over many years. Catherine's response was to embrace her husband, holding him tightly while she cried against his shoulder. Daniel stood stiffly in the embrace at first, clearly uncomfortable with the public display of emotion and affection. But gradually, his posture softened, and he raised his arms to return the embrace, holding his wife in front of cameras, studio audience, and millions of future viewers. The audience erupted in applause, not celebrating a game show victory, but witnessing what felt like a genuine breakthrough in a troubled marriage. Steve Harvey watched this scene unfold with visible satisfaction and emotion. When the couple finally separated from their embrace, Steve addressed them both together. He acknowledged that what had just happened was difficult and uncomfortable for everyone involved, but he maintained that sometimes discomfort was necessary for growth and change. He told Daniel that the embrace he had just shared with his wife needed to become a regular occurrence, not a one-time event prompted by public pressure. He told Catherine that she deserved to expect and demand affection and respect from her husband, and that she should not settle for less than what her marriage vows promised. Steve then announced that his foundation would be providing funding for the Martinez family to attend intensive marriage counseling with a therapist who specialized in emotional intimacy and breaking generational patterns of emotional distance. He emphasized that the work Daniel needed to do was serious and would require sustained effort and commitment. Changing behavior patterns that had been established over a lifetime would not be easy or quick. But Steve expressed his belief that if Daniel was truly committed to saving his marriage and showing his wife the love she deserved, the change was possible with professional support and genuine effort. The episode that captured this confrontation and breakthrough aired 3 weeks later, and the public response was immediate and overwhelming. The clip of Steve calling out Daniel's behavior went viral within hours, generating millions of views and sparking intense discussion across social media platforms. The responses were mixed, but predominantly supportive of Steve's decision to address the issue directly. Many viewers, particularly women, expressed deep appreciation for Steve's willingness to publicly defend Catherine and call out Daniel's disrespectful behavior. Thousands of women shared their own stories of being in marriages where their husbands were emotionally distant or refused physical affection, describing the profound loneliness and pain of feeling unwanted by the person who was supposed to be your closest partner. These women thanked Steve for giving voice to an experience that many people suffered in silence, afraid to complain about what might seem like a small issue compared to more obvious forms of marital dysfunction like abuse or infidelity. Relationship experts and marriage counselors praised the episode as a powerful example of how small gestures and physical affection were not trivial aspects of marriage, but essential components of emotional intimacy and connection. They explained that consistent refusal of physical touch and public displays of affection could be forms of emotional neglect that caused real psychological harm over time. The experts noted that Daniel's behavior, while not intentionally malicious, had the cumulative effect of communicating to Catherine that she was unworthy of affection and had eroded her self-esteem and sense of value in the relationship. Some viewers criticized Steve for putting Daniel and Catherine in such an uncomfortable position on national television, arguing that their marital issues should have been addressed privately rather than being aired for public consumption. These critics suggested that while Steve's intentions may have been good, the public nature of the confrontation could have caused more harm than good by humiliating Daniel and potentially making him more resistant to change. They worried about the long-term impact on the Martinez family of having such a private struggle become public entertainment. However, the majority of responses supported Steve's decision to speak up. Many people pointed out that Daniel's behavior had already been public, occurring on camera in front of a studio audience. Steve had simply named what everyone could already see and had challenged Daniel to acknowledge and address it. Furthermore, numerous viewers shared that watching the episode had prompted them to have important conversations in their own marriages about affection, respect, and emotional intimacy. The public nature of Steve's confrontation had created a cultural moment that gave people permission to address issues they had been avoiding or minimizing in their own relationships. The impact on the Martinez family was profound and complex. In the immediate aftermath of the episode airing, they faced intense public scrutiny and commentary. Friends, extended family members, and even strangers felt entitled to offer opinions about their marriage and Daniel's behavior. This unwanted attention was difficult for the entire family to navigate. However, the public nature of their struggle also created accountability and motivation for genuine change that might not have existed if the confrontation had remained private. Daniel and Catherine began attending weekly marriage counseling sessions as provided by Steve Harvey's foundation. Catherine later shared in interviews that the counseling had been transformative for their marriage. The therapist had helped Daniel understand that his discomfort with physical affection was rooted not just in his childhood experiences, but also in his own insecurities and fears about emotional vulnerability. Daniel had been avoiding physical intimacy with Catherine because it made him feel exposed and vulnerable in ways that scared him. The therapist helped him develop tools for managing that discomfort while still meeting his wife's needs for affection and connection. The counseling also helped Catherine understand her own role in the marital dynamic. While Daniel's behavior was primarily the problem that needed addressing, Catherine had enabled it to some extent by accepting the status quo for so long without insisting on change. The therapist worked with Catherine on setting clear expectations and boundaries, expressing her needs directly, and being willing to create discomfort in the relationship when necessary to prompt growth and change. Catherine learned that protecting her husband from discomfort by not demanding the affection she needed was ultimately harmful to both of them and to their marriage. 6 months after their appearance on Family Feud, the Martinez family participated in a follow-up interview for Steve Harvey's talk show. The transformation in their relationship was visible and remarkable. Daniel and Catherine sat close together on the couch, and throughout the interview Daniel repeatedly reached for Catherine's hand, touched her arm, and made small gestures of physical connection that had been completely absent during their game show appearance. When Steve commented on the change, Daniel explained that it had required conscious, consistent effort to retrain his instincts and overcome his discomfort with public displays of affection. Daniel spoke candidly about how difficult the process had been and continued to be. He explained that his first instinct was still often to maintain physical distance, but he had learned to recognize that instinct and choose differently. He described it as similar to breaking any other bad habit, requiring mindfulness and deliberate choice until the new behavior became more automatic. He acknowledged that he still struggled sometimes, particularly in moments of stress or conflict, but that he was committed to continuing the work because he had seen how much it mattered to Catherine and to the health of their marriage. Catherine spoke about the impact that Daniel's efforts had on her emotional well-being and her sense of security in their marriage. She described feeling valued and chosen in a way she had not felt in years. The physical affection Daniel was now showing her was meaningful not just because touch itself was important, though it was, but because it represented Daniel's willingness to be uncomfortable for her sake, to prioritize her needs over his own comfort. That willingness had restored her trust in their partnership and had allowed her to feel safe being vulnerable with him again. The Martinez children also participated in the follow-up interview and shared their perspectives on their parents' journey. All three expressed that while the initial confrontation had been shocking and embarrassing, they were grateful that it had happened. They admitted that they had been aware on some level that their parents' marriage lacked warmth and intimacy, but they had not understood how much pain their mother had been in or how serious the problem was. Witnessing their father's commitment to change and their parents' willingness to work on their marriage had actually strengthened the children's respect for both parents and had taught them valuable lessons about what healthy relationships required. Amanda, the daughter, spoke particularly movingly about how watching her parents' experience had influenced her own approach to her romantic relationship. She said that seeing how years of small rejections and withheld affection had damaged her mother had made her determined never to settle for a relationship that did not include consistent demonstration of love and respect. She had learned from her parents' struggle that love was not enough on its own. Love had to be actively expressed and demonstrated through words and actions on a regular basis, or the relationship would slowly starve regardless of the underlying feelings. The Martinez family story had ripple effects that extended far beyond their own healing. Marriage counselors reported significant increases in couples seeking help specifically to address issues related to physical affection and emotional intimacy in their relationships. Many of these couples referenced the Family Feud episode as the catalyst that prompted them to seek help, with one or both partners identifying with either Catherine's experience of feeling rejected or Daniel's struggle with expressing affection, despite genuinely loving their spouse. Several organizations that provided marriage counseling and relationship support reported increased donations following the episode, with donors specifically mentioning that Steve Harvey's confrontation of Daniel had highlighted the importance of addressing these issues before they destroyed marriages. Some donors shared that they wished someone had intervened in their own marriages before emotional distance had become insurmountable, and they wanted to support resources that could help other couples avoid the same fate. The episode also sparked important conversations about masculinity and emotional expression. Many men came forward to share that they identified with Daniel's struggle, having been raised in families or cultures where physical affection and emotional vulnerability were seen as weakness or femininity rather than normal human needs. These men expressed appreciation for seeing Daniel's journey because it gave them hope that they too could change patterns that they recognized were harmful to their relationships. The episode helped create space for men to discuss the ways that rigid gender expectations around emotional expression had damaged their relationships and their own emotional well-being. Conversely, the episode also generated important discussions about the gendered nature of emotional labor in relationships. Many women pointed out that Catherine's story was painfully common, with wives often bearing the burden of managing the emotional health of their marriages while their husbands remained passive or disengaged. These conversations highlighted how cultural expectations that men should be stoic and unemotional, while women should be warm and nurturing created dynamics where women's needs for affection and intimacy were treated as excessive or demanding rather than as legitimate requirements for a healthy partnership. Steve Harvey himself reflected extensively on the Martinez family episode in subsequent interviews and public appearances. He explained that his decision to confront Daniel had been instinctive rather than planned. He had watched Daniel reject Catherine's attempts at connection throughout the taping, and by the time they won the fast money round and Daniel still could not bring himself to congratulate his wife properly, Steve had felt morally compelled to say something. He described feeling that if he said nothing and simply wrapped up the show as normal, he would be implicitly condoning Daniel's behavior and suggesting that treating your wife with coldness and distance was acceptable as long as you won the prize money. Steve spoke about the risk he had taken in confronting Daniel so directly on camera. He acknowledged that it could have backfired spectacularly, with Daniel becoming defensive and angry, or with Catherine being mortified and resentful of having her private pain exposed publicly. But Steve maintained that sometimes taking a risk in defense of what was right was more important than playing it safe. He said that Catherine's tearful gratitude when he had acknowledged her pain and defended her worth had confirmed that speaking up had been the right choice, even if it created discomfort in the moment. The Martinez family episode became required viewing in many marriage preparation courses and relationship education programs. Counselors and educators used it as a teaching tool to illustrate several important principles about healthy relationships. First, that small gestures of affection and respect mattered enormously and could not be neglected without serious consequences. Second, that patterns established in childhood or family of origin could influence adult relationships, but did not have to determine them. Third, that change was possible even in long-established relationships if both partners were willing to be vulnerable, do difficult work, and seek professional support when needed. The episode also served as a powerful example of the importance of speaking up when witnessing harmful behavior in relationships. Many relationship experts pointed out that friends and family members of struggling couples often noticed problems long before the couples themselves fully acknowledged them, but remained silent out of discomfort or a belief that they should not interfere in private matters. The Martinez family story demonstrated that sometimes loving someone meant being willing to have uncomfortable conversations and to call out behavior that was causing harm, even when it was easier or more comfortable to look away. 1 year after the original Family Feud episode, Daniel and Catherine Martinez appeared on Steve Harvey's talk show for a 1-year anniversary update. They reported that they were still attending couples counseling monthly and that both considered it an essential part of maintaining the progress they had made. Daniel had developed a practice of what he called conscious affection, deliberately planning moments throughout each day to show Catherine physical or verbal affection rather than waiting for it to feel natural or spontaneous. Over time, some of these gestures had become more automatic, but he recognized that he would likely always need to be intentional about maintaining connection in ways that came more naturally to other people. Catherine shared that the most significant change had been in how safe and secure she felt in their marriage. She no longer questioned whether Daniel truly wanted to be with her or whether she was valued in their partnership. His consistent efforts to show her affection and appreciation had rebuilt her confidence and had allowed her to be more vulnerable and open with him emotionally. She described their marriage as feeling new in some ways, as though they were rediscovering each other after years of emotional distance. The couple also revealed that they had started leading a support group at their church for other couples struggling with emotional intimacy and physical affection issues. They found that sharing their story and the tools they had learned in counseling was helping other couples navigate similar challenges. Daniel in particular found that talking openly about his struggles with expressing affection helped other men feel less alone and less ashamed of their own difficulties in this area. He had discovered that vulnerability and honesty about his imperfections was actually a form of strength rather than weakness. The Martinez family story stands as one of the most impactful moments in Family Feud history, transcending entertainment to create meaningful conversation about what makes marriages healthy and sustainable. It demonstrated that love alone was not sufficient for a good marriage. Love had to be consistently expressed, demonstrated, and reaffirmed through both words and actions. It showed that change was possible even in long-established patterns, but that change required genuine commitment, professional support, and sustained effort over time. The episode also highlighted the power of speaking truth with both courage and compassion. Steve Harvey had confronted Daniel firmly but without cruelty, naming the problem clearly while still treating Daniel with basic human dignity. That combination of honesty and respect had created space for Daniel to hear the criticism without becoming completely defensive, and had modeled for viewers how to have difficult conversations about harmful behavior in relationships. Perhaps most importantly, the Martinez family story gave voice to an experience that millions of people, particularly women, had suffered in silence. Catherine's willingness to speak honestly about the pain of feeling unwanted by her spouse gave permission to countless others to acknowledge their own pain and to demand better from their relationships. Her courage in being vulnerable on national television created a cultural moment that shifted conversations about what was acceptable in marriage and what constituted emotional neglect. The story serves as a powerful reminder that small gestures matter profoundly in relationships, that refusing to show affection is a choice that communicates lack of value, and that patterns can be changed when people are willing to acknowledge the harm they are causing and commit to doing the difficult work of change. It demonstrates that sometimes the most loving thing we can do for someone is to hold up a mirror and ask them to examine their own behavior, even when that examination is uncomfortable. If this story has resonated with you, or if you recognize aspects of your own relationship in the Martinez family struggle, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories about real families facing real challenges. Share this with someone who needs to understand that their need for affection and respect is legitimate and important, or with someone who needs to see that change is possible even in the most deeply ingrained patterns. Your relationships deserve attention, effort, and consistent demonstration of love and respect, and settling for less diminishes both you and your partner.